My name is Summer Boulais, and the title of my capstone project is OctoQuest, Mobilizing Citizen Science Under the Sea. So first, I just want to introduce you all to the smooth skin octopus. According to the International Union for Conservation of Nature's Red List category criteria, they are designated as data deficient. So there is not a lot known about these creatures, and they can be pretty tricky to find. And the scientific name for them is moose octopus leoderma. But despite being a little tricky to find, there are a few things that we do know about them. So they are known for having some burrowing behavioral tendencies. So they'll dig underneath the sand on the bottom of the seafloor, as shown in this picture, and just kind of bury themselves down there. They are typically found in muddy or silt habitats. They are nocturnal creatures as well as extremely successful predators.
Yep.
Okay, so a little bit of previous research on this species. There was an article that came out titled "The Odd Octopus: Identification and Burrowing Behavior of a Deepwater Octopus, Moose octopus leoderma, found in a shallow water bay." So this species is typically found at depths of over 800 feet, but during this study, they found the smooth skin in shallow waters of up to around 35 feet, which is a pretty big difference. And the area that they found the smooth skin in shallow waters is called Burroughs Bay. It's off the coast of Washington State, so it's kind of up near the border, just a bit north of Seattle. And I've got just a chart here from the article. You don't need to be looking at all the numbers on here, but this does compare the observations, or essentially sightings, of the species next to diver hours and or effort. And just a couple of things to point out is in 2022, there were 40 total observations, which is a pretty significant number compared to 31 diving hours. And in addition, over the course from 2014 to 2022, there have been a total of 135 smooth skins spotted in this shallow bay. So that is quite a significant number. And getting into the conservation issue kind of surrounds the topic of ocean acidification. And for those not familiar with this term, I'm going to define it as according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Ocean acidification refers to a reduction in the pH of the ocean over an extended period of time caused primarily by the uptake of carbon dioxide, or CO2, from the atmosphere. So I've got a little diagram up here just of kind of how the ocean carbon cycle works, and I'm going to go through and explain it a little bit. So the bottom of the ocean is naturally more acidic because of the decomposition of plants and animals over time. So they just kind of drop down there and the CO2 collects naturally. But in our current planet, we have a lot of rising and or changing temperatures, and these temperatures can alter wind patterns. And when these wind patterns change, that can also change the way that the nutrient circulation works. So it can affect it in a way that it's pushing more of that acidic water from the deep up to the shallow waters. And then this is also coupled because the shallow waters are exposed to the surface or the air, which also has excess CO2 just from air pollution and kind of other activities. And so in theory, this would make shallow waters a more similar environment to deeper waters that the smooth skin are used to and have acclimated to. So it could be a possible reason as to why they're coming to the surface, because it's an environment that they are already kind of familiar with. But as I previously mentioned, smooth skin are extremely successful predators. So having them enter a new habitat could cause some pretty significant changes to the shallow water ecosystems. So the goal to address this conservation issue is to track the possible expansion of this smooth skin species, to understand their impact in these shallow habitats, whether they're positive or negative, were unsure of that. And to accomplish the goal I just covered, I plan to use the help of citizen science. And for those not familiar with the term citizen science, I'm going to define it as according to the National Geographic. Citizen science is the practice of public participation and collaboration in scientific research to increase scientific knowledge. Through citizen science, people share and contribute to data monitoring and collection programs. So in summary, this basically means that you are asking the public, you're kind of asking volunteers to help you out with accomplishing some sort of goal or research question and gather data. So that they could be monitoring plants or some other sort of species. There's a big range for citizen science. But speaking of ranges, as I mentioned, smooth skin are moving from kind of one range to another, but their range of habitats in general is pretty extensive already. So they are usually found along the northeastern Pacific, and this can range from Alaska all the way down to Southern California. So that's quite a bit of water to cover, which is why we're thinking of using citizen science to kind of help get some help in covering that range. But ultimately, tracking their proliferation could provide some really valuable insights for future conservation planning. And all of these different pieces with the smooth skin and ocean acidification and citizen science are essentially the core of my capstone project. So now I'm going to introduce you to the partner that I worked with over the summer. It is called Rosario Beach Marine Laboratory, also known as RBML, as well as On-Thank Cephalopod Physiology Lab. So I know there's a lot of titles going on, and I'm going to explain what these are. So number one, RBML is owned by Walla Walla University, which is actually my undergraduate university up in Washington. It's located on the southeast border of Washington and Oregon. And it owns the satellite campus of RBML to use for teaching marine courses as well as conducting research. This is a picture that I took of the lab just to show that it is quite literally directly on the water. So it is really great for research because you've got that direct ocean access. And then the partners that I worked most closely with and collaborated with this summer is number one, Dr. Kurt On-Thank. He is the director of RBML as well as a biology professor at Walla Walla University. He has done a lot of research on cephalopods, and he was actually part of that research article I showed previously. So he was part of studying their burrowing behavior as well as discovering that they were in the shallow waters of Burroughs Bay. And he has done a lot of research looking into how climate change impacts different octopus species. So he works with lots of graduate students on different topics. One specific example is looking at how ocean acidification affects the metabolic rates of specific octopus species. So he's got a pretty large background in this topic. And then Caitlin Cassidy is also a Walla Walla University alumni, and she is a scientific illustrator. And I will get into later in this presentation as to why that was such a huge piece of this project and a huge help for this project. And then just some other honorable mentions of major collaborators over the summer. Number one is Anacortes Diving, which is a dive shop in Washington, as well as Bayshore Print is a printing facility up in Washington. And then OctoNation is a nonprofit organization. And essentially their main goal is to just teach people about octopuses and really just how cool they are. And so I'm going to share a little bit about the social ecological context of this project. Earlier you heard me say the name Anacortes, and so this is located near Burroughs Bay, once again up near that border of Washington, and it is on this upper side of Fidalgo Island. And the Marine Lab is kind of on that lower end, and geographically this is not a very big island. It is really only a 15-minute drive from the Marine Lab to downtown Anacortes, just for context. But the target audience for this project was the diving community of Anacortes, and this is a group of people that are really connected to the underwater world, whether it is through recreative diving or photography or even research. And then just some local values of Anacortes, like I mentioned, is recreation, but they are also extremely into art. They have a ton of art festivals held downtown pretty often, and they also have lots of galleries, whether it's from photography of marine creatures or other things that people put up. And then also marine education is a really big thing in the area. So there's lots of museums for people of all ages to walk through and learn about marine life, as well as they also host lots of summer camps to teach kids about marine life and what's in their waters. And then there is also a decently sized fishing industry in the area. So this is going to tie that economic health to the health of the marine ecosystems. So this also means that the locals are pretty receptive to efforts to protect marine life because it is connected to their livelihoods. And then lastly, the context for the more ecological side of things is obviously a little tricky because smoothskins are moving from one ecosystem to another. But as I mentioned, they are a really successful predator that are entering new habitats, but ultimately we are unsure of their impact in terms of that thus far. And now I'm just going to share a little bit of legislative history. So back in 2012, a diver posted a picture of him holding a giant Pacific octopus that he harvested. And at the time, this was a legal thing to do. But the social media post went absolutely viral, and there was kind of an uproar about it of people so upset that this was something that was legal. And that uproar ranged from Anacortes all the way down to Seattle. And so people started to kind of have like a cultural shift, and they started contacting like local wildlife departments asking if there's anything we can do to protect this species. We don't want this to happen again. And ultimately, by 2013, there was 10 octopus protection areas established off the coast of Washington, which is pretty incredible. And then also just this year, a House bill was passed that made octopus farming illegal in Washington. And this is actually the world's first legislation to ban this practice. So this is also a pretty big deal. And this was led by the Aquatic Animal Alliance, as well as also local organizations, kind of helped lead the effort to get this ban put in place. And just some influencing factors as to why people in this area may value octopuses in their lives so much. Number one, there are a lot of nonprofit organizations in Anacortes and surrounding the area, and they provide lots of marine opportunities for locals to kind of interact. So this can range from providing volunteer opportunities to help do beach cleanups, or also just hosting like education, like workshops to teach people about marine life or brainstorm how to protect them in the future. And an example of this relative to the Marine Lab is there's a nonprofit called Soundwater Stewards, and they have hosted kind of education workshops at the Marine Lab before. I am just thinking about what we can do to protect what's in our waters. And then a second example is there are a lot of outdoor education companies in the area as well. So they kind of are leading and teaching youth about marine life, which can really help to establish those values young. And then another example of this relative to the Marine Lab is there is a outdoor education company called the Salish Sea School, and they have hosted summer camps at Rosario before, which is a really great place to do it once again because it is got that ocean access. So some goals and activities for this Capstone project. My partner and I really wanted to create some sort of tool to help those that were willing to participate in the citizen science portion of this project. So the tool that we aimed to create was an octopus identification guide. And the goal of this guide was to have divers take this guide with them so that they would be able to tell what species they're looking at when they're diving and help them know if it's a smoothskin or not. And the idea is that this guide would include 3 different octopus species. So number 1, obviously you're going to have the smoothskin octopus on there. Secondly, you're going to have the giant Pacific octopus, which was shown in the last slide with that social media post that went viral. And then number 3 is the ruby octopus, which is just another species that is native to the area. And then secondly, we wanted to make some sort of survey on an organized platform, just so that we could collect all the data in one place of where people are finding the smoothskin, or maybe where they're not finding the smoothskin, because it's also really important to know where they're not located and maybe where they're not showing up in shallow waters. And then as motivation, we wanted to launch a competition of essentially who could find the most smooth skin or who could put in the most effort to look for them. And I will be getting into more of the details on this, but just a couple little tidbits about it is that it was intended to be a 1 month long competition over the month of September, just adding that time limit as kind of some extra motivation for people to start searching for them. And then we also wanted to host a sort of Q&A event at the Marine Lab. And the idea behind this was just to introduce the project and why we're doing it and answer people's questions about it. And then lastly, we wanted to design and distribute posters. So the idea is that these posters would be sent out to lots of different dive shops in Washington, as well as going into Anacortes and hopefully reaching out to some locals about the project. And then an additional goal that popped up during the summer that wasn't on my original proposal, but I did want to mention and talk about, is the Marine Lab hosted an aquarium pop-up in downtown Anacortes. So basically what they did is they brought some marine species downtown so that they could show the locals and talk about them and kind of get to know the locals. And so I was lucky enough to also be a part of this. So I got to go downtown and I got to kind of start developing those relationships with people. I got to talk about my project, and then also just answering people's questions about octopuses was a really fun experience. So getting into the details of the competition, there are essentially 3 different prize tiers, but they're not necessarily first, second, and third. It's more of just different categories. So number 1 was the most smooth skin individuals photographed. And this was a really key thing because it's going to be most useful for research in the long run to have images of those species. So because it is the most useful, it does have the biggest prize associated with it, which was a free 2-night stay at one of the cabins at Rosario. So it was extremely exciting to get this basically free weekend at Rosario approved by the school to kind of be that biggest grand prize for the competition. And then secondly is the most sighting reports. So not every diver is going to own a camera, and we didn't want to limit it to people that had cameras. So this, you can win with or without photos, just whoever has logged the most sightings of the species. And then thirdly is essentially the most reports total. So this could be absences or presences of the species, but we kind of wanted to maybe help ease some of that frustration if people aren't finding the smooth skin, and we wanted to reward their effort into the project. And so those second and third categories would receive gift bundles from OctoNation, which is the nonprofit that I mentioned previously. And these gift bundles would basically just be like a hoodie with an octopus on it and an octopus mug and just kind of some cute little things to reward people for their effort. And then of course we had to set some parameters and rules. So number 1, cheating eliminates you from the competition and ultimately winning. And we were basically planning to mitigate this with kind of an adaptive management strategy, but we were going to have people note who their dive buddies were to possibly validate data if that was necessary. And then secondly, Burroughs Bay is off limits. So we already know that the smooth skin are in shallow waters of Burroughs Bay. So it wouldn't be incredibly helpful for people to just go and take pictures of what we already know. And then number 3 is that dive buddies should be reporting separate entries. And the purpose behind this rule is really just for future data organization. It makes it a lot easier to have those separate logs. And then number 4 is that the observations must be made by you. You can't just say, oh, my friend might have saw one over here. That has to be made by you. And so the title that we went with for this project is OctoQuest, as I mentioned on that very first slide. And we ended up using a platform called SitSci, which is actually an extension of CSU. And on their About section on their website, they define themselves as a global citizen science support platform. We streamline citizen science so you can focus on designing and implementing projects for greater impact. And I'm actually going to hop into SitSci and show you the homepage that we created. And you don't need to be paying attention to the numbers right now because I will be covering results later in this presentation. But this is the home page, and essentially these are things I've already talked about, but it's just kind of what the species is called, where it was usually found versus where it's showing up. And then we've got goals, which is to track their possible expansion to figure out what their positive or negative impacts are on these new habitats. And then the tasks are just different things that we're asking people to log within the surveys. And then there are some different super helpful tabs up here. We've got data where you can look at other people's observations or maybe see a map of where everyone's been diving. There's also resources, which I will be going over these when I'm talking about deliverables, but these are just helpful tools for people, especially if they haven't done something like this before. And then we've got a forum where people can talk with each other, ask questions. And then, like I said, analysis and results is something I will be going over later. But if you click on this Add Data tab, we actually decided to make 2 surveys instead of 1. And so if you click on that first survey, this is the smooth skin octopus absent survey. So it means that you did not find a smooth skin during your dive. And this first part is pretty general. It's just asking you the date, what your name is, as well as the place that you dove. So you can go into this map and click on the spot you dove, or you can enter the name of the diving spot. You don't actually have to put the latitude and longitude, since I will do that for you. And then down here, we just want you to indicate that no smooth skin were spotted during your dive. And then we're going to ask if the majority of the ocean floor was muddy or silty, because I mentioned previously that's usually where they're found. But if that's not where you were diving, then we want to know what the ocean floor was like where you were diving. And we give some different options for that. And then just a couple of ending questions is what the deepest depth of your dive was, as well as who your dive buddy was. And then if you go back to the main page and you click here, head back to Add Data, you're going to click on Smooth Skin Octopus Present. So this survey is super similar, except it's if you did find a smooth skin during the dive. So this first section is essentially the same, asking you your name and where you went. And then if you come down here to indicate sighting type, you've got 2 different options. Number 1, you can say, yes, I saw a smooth skin on my dive. Or you can say, I'm not really sure if it was a smooth skin, it maybe was. So 2 options right there. And then once again, just asking about that ocean floor to see what kind of habitat you were in. And then we also want to know the depth in your dive buddy, but then there's also this super helpful feature that SitSci has where you can add images. So this is where people would add images if they were able to take pictures of the smooth skin during their dive. I'll hop back over to the slides. Okay, so now I'm going to get into some of the obstacles we faced over the summer. So number 1, the creation of the guides was definitely a learning process. And there was a lot of trial and errors, and we just had to be really adaptive at trying to make the best version that we could. So I did bring some of the earliest versions of the guide, and I'll talk about them and then pass them around and let you guys feel them. But this was the first one, so it's basically just a laminated piece of paper with this little hook to attach to you when you go underwater. But you can even see up here that it's kind of see-through. It's a little hard to see. And like I said, the smooth skin are nocturnal species, so you're most likely to find them if you're diving at night. So we needed something that was going to be easier to see, and this is also just really flimsy, which is also not great for diving. So you can pass those around if you want to feel them. And then we decided to brainstorm some different ideas, and we came up with deciding to make the paper thicker. So this is not see-through, it's a lot sturdier when you bend it. However, the laminator that we had was not really prepared for thicker paper. So there's kind of some bubbles on the edges, which means it could be easy for water to leak in, which is also not extremely ideal. So we kept testing different thicknesses of papers and different ideas, but then we decided to actually test the guide on a dive and just see how it did. So this guide did go on a dive with somebody. However, somehow it got pierced during the dive, so water did get into the guide and it leaked into it, getting some water damage. And then also we noticed that the grommet up here got some saltwater damage, so it was kind of rusting, which is an issue, especially if you want to take this on multiple dives, it could possibly break, which is not great. So after we got to that portion, we were getting a little bit frustrated and weren't super sure how to make the guide better after trying all these different ways. But then my partner, Dr. Onfank, ended up looking in one of the classrooms and he found this guide up here, which is just on some different marine species. It's a really old guide, not honestly sure when it was made, but it was extremely sturdy. And the reason that this diver's guide was so sturdy is because it had thicker laminate rather than thicker paper. So I'm not sure how we didn't think of that before, but once he showed me this, then I was like, yes, that is what we need to do to make this better. And so we decided to get thicker laminate, and this is actually the final version of the guide, so it's way sturdier. You're not going to be risking as much water damage. And then we also found marine safe grommets. So this has been tested in saltwater and it does not rust. So it's super exciting to finally make a product that we were happy with. And the clips are also just kind of an extra preventative measure because most divers usually have their own clips, but that is put on there just in case they don't. And the second obstacle we ran into was involving the poster, which was one of the activities I mentioned previously. And there was a little bit of a language mishap, but I did bring those posters as well, and I'll walk through what all is on them. First, you just got a picture of the cabins you could potentially stay at if you win. And then we just got some information about the project and SITSI, how to sign up. And then these are the details of the event to come to the Marine Lab to learn more about the project. You've got a QR code that leads you to SITSI to sign up for OctoQuest. And then you've got this cute little diver and the date, as well as a option to RSVP for the event. But after sending this to multiple dive shops and emailing them to a ton of people in Washington, some of which put it up in their dive shops, as well as I also went to local spots in Anacortes asking different organizations if I could put it up in their establishments. We were notified that there is a bit of a liability issue. So we did call it a diving competition at first, but we were told that if someone was diving for our competition and they had an injury or something happened, they could potentially sue the school because we called it a diving competition. So we had to go back and make a couple of changes. And so this is the new version of the poster. It's essentially the same, except we highlighted that it's called a rare octopus sighting competition. I took out the cute little diver and changed this portion down here. But this ultimately was had to replace all of the old ones, so I had to re-email all those places as well as replace the posters that I had put up in person. Thanks. And then, like I said, there was an option on the bottom of those posters to RSVP for the event. However, we only had one RSVP. So the event kind of turned into more of a live stream situation. And that live stream ended up having some audio issues, which was unfortunate that people couldn't hear us for a little bit. And then some other technical difficulties that I ran into over the summer is my personal computer, the battery essentially stopped working. So it was really hard to get things done over the summer with a computer that was barely working, as well as there was also really poor cell service on the island. So that kind of made advertising and communicating about the project just difficult in general. But getting into the results, as I said, there was one RSVP, but unfortunately that person did not show up. However, we did have 2 people come in person as well as 4 online attendees. And the live stream actually did have 25 views total, but there was only 4 consistent viewers. And in terms of the competition and people logging things on OctoQuest, we've had 2 contributors so far. So essentially we also have 2 winners. So those 2 people will be receiving the OctoNation gift bundles. And then we also decided to extend that big grand prize and the competition altogether to go through the winter. And the purpose behind that is that it'll make it quite a bit easier to do night dives. Like I said, they're a nocturnal species, so you're more likely to find them at night. And it's easier to do night dives with the changing of the seasons and the time change as well being earlier. And if you look at this chart, it basically means that 0 smooth skin have been found so far. But both of this chart and the map is actually from the results section of CLTL, so it does a really good job of organizing data for you, which will be really helpful in the long run. But this map is the different areas that people have dove looking for them so far. So this ranges from just outside of Anacortes all the way down to Seattle and even further down to Tacoma. So even with only 2 participants, it's pretty exciting how much range we've already started to cover so far. And then getting into the deliverables, like I said, there were 2 surveys we created on CLTL, but I'm actually going to hop back into that resources tab and walk you through some of the tools that we put on there just as helpful things for our participants. So number 1, we've got the project live stream. So this is when Dr. Onthank was kind of talking about some specifics about the species as well as the project and people's answers to questions. So people who weren't able to attend or are a little bit newer can watch that and learn basically everything about it. And then we've got, of course, the OctoQuest ID guide. There's an online version in case people don't want to take it on the dive and they want to look at it after their dive. And then more about smooth skin is a link to OctoNation, that nonprofit, and they've actually got a part on their website that just kind of gives some fun facts about smooth skin, so that's just kind of a fun extra. And then we have the abstract from the original research article, just for people interested in learning about more background behind why we're doing this project. And then lastly, we've got the smooth skin octopus range. This is a map that was made by Caitlin, which I showed previously during some of those background slides. And then I'm going to hop back into here. And this is ultimately the biggest deliverable, is this guide from the summer, especially the physical copy, which I can hopefully get back because I'm going to read something off of it real quick. Just the sturdiest one you got. Just tuck it. Thank you. So I won't be reading everything on this guide, but I do want to just highlight some of the things that we did do. So number 1, we've got the smooth skin octopus at the top of the page, just because it's the star of the show. And I'm gonna read how we described it. With a mantle no larger than a ping pong ball, this small octopus is found exclusively at night and only on muddy or silty bottoms. Smooth skin octopuses will not ink, as this species lacks an ink sac. They burrow directly into the muddy bottom to escape predators, and then we direct people to look at the other side. But all of these different illustrations were done by Caitlin Cassidy, so they are really accurate versions of what these species look like. And then Dr. Onthank was pretty much in charge of those details, kind of describing them and showing what's going on with the anatomy. And then my role was more of just kind of organizing and formatting, as well as being in charge of making the physical version happen. But if you go to the second part of the guide, we've got the giant Pacific octopus. So we just give a little description about them, and then we highlight some kind of key features that could help you identify them. And then we've also got these zoomed in portions of what their tentacles look like, because you may not always see the whole octopus, you might just see a little tentacle go by. And then we've got the ruby octopus, which is the 3rd species, and then same thing, we just talk about it. And then we've also got these highlighted versions, like a close-up of the eyes, maybe that's all you saw going by. And then this is the backside of the physical guide, and we have got some eye size and mantle texture comparisons. So between the 3 different species, their mantles differ quite a bit between the texture of them. So we just highlight some of those key features of it. And then showing their burrowing behavior was also a really important part, especially if divers are going at night. They might only just see their head sticking out of the sand rather than the whole octopus. So we kind of describe what that might look like. And then we've also just got some helpful tips for identification in general and kind of what these terms we're using are, like what a mantle is and things like that. what some of these anatomy terms are. And the hope is that this could kind of help streamline that citizen science process and assist people. And then we've also got the octopus anatomy, how many arms do they have and things like that. And then lastly, we've got how you can help. So this little blurb just talks about OctoQuest and CLTL and how to sign up. This QR code takes you to OctoQuest, and then of course we've got some different logos here for OctoNation as well as the university and marine lab. But ultimately, these deliverables, the guide and CLTL and all of these things kind of helped establish that project foundation for my Capstone partner. So now going forward, he'll be able to focus his efforts on communicating about the species and advertising OctoQuest rather than starting from ground zero and having to make the guide and make the survey. So hopefully that will help streamline that and make it easier going forward. And then getting into some of the broader impacts of this project, Dr. Onthank is actually planning on applying to a grant from the US National Science Foundation, also known as NSF. He would like to receive funds to study the connection between the physiology of smooth skin octopus and how they're able to extend their range. So basically what that means is he wants to know what's going on the inside that helps them acclimate so easily to shallow waters, or maybe they aren't acclimating easily and they are being affected and there are things going on the inside we just don't know yet, and he wants to find out. And the NSF actually has a section on their grant called Broader Impacts. And essentially what it asks people is to talk about how their project could potentially benefit society. And one of the topics that you can talk about for this portion of the grant application is called public engagement. And they define it as increasing public scientific literacy and public engagement with STEM. So the creation of OctoQuest gives him an opportunity to talk about this, and it really will help increase his chances of getting the grant by having something to talk about and want to explore and grow on with the help of this grant. And then some other things I just want to cover is that this project provides the public an opportunity to contribute to research. So that can be kind of a rare thing to just have like some divers from the general public be able to do something that helps answer a research question. And then potentially, especially with the help if the grant is received, their data could be in a published article in the future. So if this research is done and Dr. Onthank's article gets published on it, then it could include the data that was done by these divers, which is a pretty exciting thing because it could help increase the viability of citizen science and STEM in general. Having data that was from the general public be in a published article could help with that. And then additionally, it was just really interesting to be able to share knowledge with a community that values octopuses. And we've seen that they value octopuses just from some of that legislative history in the area. So it was honestly just a rare opportunity that I was really thankful to be a part of, to be able to talk about this species with people that care about them. And then I'm just going to summarize some of the main successes from the summer. So first off, the creation of the guide was a project that started back in 2021 between Dr. Onthank and Caitlin, and they just weren't able to get some of those details worked out, especially with making the physical version. So I was really excited that I was able to help them complete something that they've wanted done for a while and just getting some of those behind the scenes help for them. And then secondly, the creation of the CLTL survey provides that research baseline. So CLTL is going to be a huge help because it has free unlimited data storage. So as this project grows and we get more participation, having all that data stored in one place that is just endless is going to be a huge thing for future research. And then some goals we have for the future. Number one, we're considering doing some sort of annual competition for this in terms of looking for the smooth skin. And that could also, obviously we need to increase participation, but as that grows, the hope is that to maybe turn it into an annual one. And then secondly, applying to and hopefully receiving the NSF grant, because this could also streamline some of those details and allow people to participate more in the citizen science, potentially like providing people cameras to take pictures of the octopuses and things like that. So that could be pretty exciting if that's received. And then number three, obviously just continuing the search for these smooth skin, because we do want to know if they are only at Burroughs Bay to figure out why they might only be there. And then I've got some recommendations just based off of my experience with this project. Number one, I've definitely seen that social media is a really powerful tool, and the impact of a single video or a single post can lead to change. And we saw this with the creation of the octopus protection areas. So I would definitely recommend utilizing social media more in the future, definitely in terms of advertising, and even if the funds are received, potentially hiring a social media intern whose sole job is to advertise OctoQuest using social media. And then secondly, I would recommend hosting the event in town in Anacortes or doing a live stream only. And the reason that I would recommend this is just being really considerate of the convenience of the locals. So when we did do the pop-up aquarium, there was quite a bit of foot traffic. And I think that's because people are already downtown and it's easy for them to attend something when they're already down there. So I would definitely recommend that, or if that's just kind of not within capacity, I would say to do just a live stream and you focus your efforts on advertising that live stream over the summer. And I think that could definitely result in further participation. And then number three, I would emphasize from the get-go that smooth skins are a nocturnal species. So your best bet at finding them is going to be at night, and that could potentially lead to just changing the timing of the competition and just doing it in winter to allow for those easier night dives. And then number four, I would recommend following the best practices for citizen science. So for this project, we did an annotated bibliography on just some different topics relative to our projects. And a piece of that bibliography that I did was on some citizen science and kind of the research and background behind it. And I learned a lot from doing that. Obviously, your data is going to be most viable with more involvement from the researchers or the educators, but there were also some articles more specifically on marine monitoring with volunteers that were interesting. And I learned that you could potentially tailor your project based off of the type of divers that you're working with. And so as we get more diver participation and kind of learning who we're working with, whether it's like photographers or just recreators and things like that, maybe going back to some of those articles and kind of just tailoring it based off of that. And then I also did share that bibliography with Dr. Onthink. Hopefully it'll be a helpful tool as the project grows. And then before moving on to the next slide, I wanted to show this. So OctoNation, that nonprofit we collaborated with, did a social media post on the species in general and a little bit about OctoQuest, and ended up getting 6,000 likes and 600 comments. So definitely just going back to that first recommendation that social media could be super useful in the future. And then moving on to some leadership reflections. In terms of project management, I've learned that accomplishable goals are extremely necessary. And getting into that a little bit more is I do recognize that having a vision for the future is super helpful and it is needed. But I also learned that you have to address the needs of the present first before you can really get into that big picture. So that was something that I definitely noticed by the end of the summer. And then additionally, my experience taught me that I need to allow the time and the space for creativity and to kind of let that innovative process happen, and that you cannot always follow a strict schedule. Because at the start of the summer, I made my proposal with deadlines that I set for myself for different things. But if we had followed those deadlines, we would be stuck with one of those guides. And that is obviously not ideal. So waiting till the end of the summer to get that final product that we were happy with took a little bit more time, a little bit more effort, but it was definitely, I think, worth it. And then number three, I learned the value of learning to understand both my own needs and the needs of those I'm working with within a project. And so something that I've seen kind of some personal growth in is I am definitely pretty good at being efficient and being really organized within a project. And my partner definitely has skills in slowing down and kind of thinking things through, especially just with like that adaptive management in terms of the guide. And so when you combined those skills between us together, it created a really good balance that I think was beneficial for the project. And then lastly, a future goal that I have for myself as a conservation leader in the future is to know my role within a system. And what I mean by this is previously I had a slide about where my Capstone project lied in terms of a social ecological context. So in the future, I want to consider my role within a social ecological context. So I want to look at my environmental surroundings and I want to look at my social surroundings. And this kind of gets into the idea of organizational development, but I do want to talk about the little photo that I put up here. So this is a sailboat that I got to go on. And I think that sometimes my role within a team or an organization could be project management specifically, but other times my role may be going on fun sailboat outings where I can learn to bond and trust with the people that I'm working with and kind of grow that relationship. And I think that that bond is necessary to just be successful in a project and ultimately have a positive impact in the end. And lastly, I just want to thank you all for your time and listening and see if there are any questions.